I wanted to welcome everybody to the Good Ancestors Principle Workshop. This idea came from a philosophy that's been bubbling up over the previous workshops, with the whole notion of having a positive future pulling you forward as opposed to the problems of the past pushing you away from them. And this notion of the anticipation and the expectation and the understanding of this accelerating future that we're facing is fundamentally different than fixing the problems of the past. And those of you who have heard me talk about the role between the parts and the sum of the parts, I like to use the analogy of cats and toasters. In a toaster, if you look at all the parts of the toaster, you can take them apart and put them back together again and have the same toaster. The cord breaks on a toaster, you put the cord back on and you have a whole toaster. If you look at a cat, though, and you put all the pieces of a cat on a table and you dissect it, you can understand all the parts, but you put them back together again, you don't have a cat anymore. So this understanding of the positive life-affirming qualities that we seek in civilization, humanity, versus the decomposition of the problems we face is a fundamental theme that I'd like to talk about here. We've gathered a critical mass here, I think, of people who are quite well positioned to look at the future and just talk about this future pull versus the past push. The other thing I'm very interested in this workshop is the whole notion of language and framing. One of our workshops at Santa Fe Institute, David Brin talked at, David Ellerman was there, Heather was there. Murray Gell-Mann spoke, a Nobel laureate, and wrote a book called The Quark and the Jaguar. And he said that scientists would preferably use each other's toothbrushes to using the same terminology. So we'll find a lot of people saying very similar things with different terms. And is it possible that we could come up with a common terminology for what a better world is? So can you talk about the live cats, basically, without having to decompose them into the parts and understanding why a live cat is alive or not? So, so discussing the live cat and these qualities that cats have that we know everybody can agree that a live cat is alive. Can we go forward with that? Is there a way of coming up with this framework? So one of the goals that I'd like to see here with the workshop is a movement towards a framework. There's tremendous parallels between Robert Rosen's work and Jonas Salk's work, for example. So that's another theme that I'd like to talk about. The other thing that's intrigued me is talking to some people here and their relationship to their ancestors already. So David Brin apparently gave Fred Turner a book of your father's poetry. And so David, in a sense, is, I think, channeling your father, I think the quote was. And Fred is channeling his father's. Clark is either channeling or unchanneling his great-great-great-grandfather, who was a railroad person. Perhaps there are concepts and ideas that are bigger than one person's lifespan or generation, and maybe it will take 2 or 3 generations for the idea to come out. If that's the case, that's an interesting pattern, and maybe we should be talking about intergenerational flow of these ideas. Another point I'd like to come up with in the workshop is the role of philanthropy. And if you are a .com zillionaire and want to save the world with your zillions, where do you invest it? And if there is a rapidly changing, accelerating world out there, where is it best to put the money? Is it possible that there is going to be an event in the future that requires a massive infusion of philanthropic capital on the part of somebody who's not tied to government or military activities? So maybe this a wad of philanthropic cash could be used in a accelerating change environment, and maybe we could give some advice to people. The other thing here is some very fundamental issues. Personally, those of you who heard me criticize the accounting system, I call it a pre-Columbian artifact. It comes out of Venice in 1594, or 1987 or something, Pacioli, a book called Summa, and double entry bookkeeping based on the notion of adding up transactions. And this was a profound development at the time. and it's carried a long ways, and you can go to a ATM machine anywhere and get money out of it, and it's a marvelous invention. So when you are dealing with things that are transactional, we have a very well-developed infrastructure for doing it, and very comfortable with that. I spent a career doing transactional systems before this. However, things that aren't measured in transactions, where there is a flow of interaction, where there is an intentionality, where there is an uncertainty and the anticipation of the future, I call that a transformation. Heather and I have our own language on it. Other people do. The transformational model of health, of just living a full life, of education, of development, is a longer-term flow of activities that we don't know how to measure the same way as we know how to measure transactional systems. And to me, this is one of the fundamental missing pieces to the puzzle here, is how do you deal with the flow of intentional activities, and using the current transactional metrics that we have today, I think in many cases leads to perversely incentivized systems. So the notion of trying to understand a complex evolving system by breaking it down into pieces according to predefined categories or charts of accounts, according to snapshots of time, which is the commit time of the transaction, and then adding it up and coming to a bottom line and saying, well, we're 23% good this month, is fundamentally wrong. So you can't take, 100 tons of bananas, $4 million worth of goodwill, and $93 million worth of labor and say, this is my quarterly results. Now, if somebody dumped 100 tons of bananas on my backyard, it wouldn't be an asset. It would be a major problem. So I've decided to come up with my own measure. It's called the Zoom Stick, and you all have one. So this is the world premiere of the Zoom Stick. So the Zoom viewer allows you to look through here. So if you set the space and the time knobs to 0, it looks just like a regular digital camera, okay? Now if you take your space knob and you go up, each click on the space knob is an order of magnitude bigger. So if you go to +3, you're looking at the world from a cloud. If you go to -3 on space, you're looking at the world as an ant, okay? So this is how the Zoom Stick works. You have this magical zoom capability, and time works the same way in terms of time lapse. So you have a time lapse positive and negative. So you can speed things up, and if you really want to get exciting, you can turn space to 25 and time to 25 and see the Big Bang happen in 2 seconds or whatever. Okay, now the other thing you'll notice here, speaking of good ancestors, I'm building a science center for my children. It's the Papa Tom's Cosmos Research Center over there. It's the galactic headquarters. And we have a scale model of the solar system here. So if you wander over there, you'll see Earth, Mars, Moon, or Earth, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So this is all done to scale. The Sun is a 1-inch diameter at that end of the yard. Pluto is 336 feet over there to scale. A red giant, Betelgeuse, happens to be the size of the room back there, 30 feet in diameter. So that's actually what a red giant would look like. So that's the Zoom Stick scale setting 10. So if you set this to 10 and you look down at the solar system, you'd see a 300-foot radius thing. So one of the other things about the Zoom Stick is you have a local remote switch on the right side here. So local means you're just using your own model, and remote means I'm actually connecting with someone else's Zoom Stick and I'm seeing their perspective. So you're the observer and I'm the watcher. So Werner can set his at +10, I can set mine -5, and I could be an ant watching from the solar system. So that adds some complexity to the programming, but it opens up some interesting ideas for...
When are you going to put this on your website?
This itself?
As an interface.
Yeah, well, that's coming real soon. Yeah, Ben's going to program it for me. Then we have another switch setting here called retro. And this is what happens when you have a Zoom Stick in its own past. So this is the past looking at the future. And the future can now look back and see the past, and you're actually in a time machine, if you will.
This is quantum computer programming.
It could be, yes. And it could be a wormhole. And wormholes could exist, and it could happen without violating known laws of physics. It's a big could. But the point is the retro information, I call it, an information theory based on information influencing its own past, and it gets into a formalism for anticipation theory. So this is my thinking, and I've been talking to some quantum theorists about retroinformation at the quantum level on retroinformation, and it's obviously a much broader subject than I can talk about in 20 minutes. But anyway, you saw it first here on the Zoom stick, and it'll come soon. After I did the Zoom stick, I opened up Werner's book, and the first page was a vertical representation of this. But so the Zoom stick is one of the topics, and understanding the role of scale is a topic. Another topic that I see coming up frequently is the whole notion of causality and what causes what. And Judith Rosen will be talking about this, I think, with Robert's work. And I think it's very timely. And one of the phrases that I got out of Life Itself book was when why is a loaded question. If you ask why, you're asking somebody to say because, and you're forcing that causality. And I think if you look at some of the views of the world across scale, there are things that happen at many different scales. And in healthcare, you can look at health at the genetic level, at the cellular level, at the organ, the body, mind, species, evolutionary life, if you will. There are many different scales and they all interact. Our science tends to slice the continuum of scales that they can look at according to that within which causality can be proved. So we have chemistry and we have population biology, and never the two shall meet. The notion of having intrinsics or properties that manifest themselves over many different scales is very powerful. And if you look at that, the intrinsics, things that have many different scalar effects, you suddenly have a different respect for things that cross scale and are not necessarily in the same causal relationship that answer this why question. So for example, there's a thing called the Copenhagen Consensus, and it's the top 10 problems of the world to be resolved, and I call it a beauty contest for problems. You know, so you have all these problems being presented by experts according to a panel of judges, and everybody wants their problem to be worse. So is poverty worse than AIDS, worse than illiteracy? And so the winner gets the prize. I mean, you can only deal with the top 10 problems. Number 11 is out to lunch. If there is something that crosses all 10 or 12 or 50 problems, but it's just a tiny little intrinsic, if you will, it doesn't get any attention because it's not a causal because, okay? So I think what we need to do is be able to see the impacts and the effects of these cascading relationships and effects. So for example, the level of trust in society. That sounds kind of wishy-washy compared to curing polio or AIDS or illiteracy. And if you look at the illiteracy problem and you look at trust, you don't quite see the connection. But if you look at polio today, we're pretty much through the entire world except Niger and Indonesia, and the reason that the vaccine hasn't completed is lack of trust in the situation, that they don't trust the vaccine. So trust is inhibiting the polio vaccine eradication problems. So that's one of the notions of trust. So is there a way of looking at these intrinsics, the trust as a whole, and then showing these cascading effects, and how would you even see this from that perspective? So that's another topic that I'm very interested in. What I'm very interested in happening with this workshop is each of you contributing your ideas and enriching your pre-established disciplines, but also hopefully synthesizing something also. I have a framework called diachronos, across time, and to me the current world is synchronic, that we transactionalize everything and turn it into bottom line thinking. The answer isn't to add more bottom lines to our thinking, but to come up with a better idea of these transformational metrics and understandings. So I'm very interested in the linguistics and the framing of things in this network of abundance. David Reed spoke at our Boston workshop in '05. He's the founder of a thing called Reed's Law of Group Forming Networks, that the value of a network goes up exponentially with the size of the group there. And this notion of network abundance came out of that, that when you start putting people together, an idea together in a network, you can have an abundance of things rather than a shortage. So there's not a shortage of information on the internet. That's not the problem. It's finding it, making it where the it's an attention process of how do you attend to that which is meaningful. So discovering meaning in this era of abundance is different than trying to figure out how to get to something that's in the model of scarcity. So if we frame our thinking in terms of abundance, there's really not a shortage of good intentions in the world. There's more than enough good intentioned people. I want to say more than enough, but a whole lot of them. Translating these aggregation of good intentions into good effects is a shortage. In fact, the negative effects of good intentions, roads to hell being paved that way, we have more than a few examples of that. So how do you go from these good intentions to good effects? And that's one of the themes I'd like to be looking at. So the fundamental thing that triggered this was Jonas Salk's quotation, which I don't want to mangle, but he said something, how do we become good ancestors? And Heather Wood-Iron was fortunate enough to be given Jonas Salk's meditation journals over the years and had many conversations with him on this subject. And I've asked Heather to talk a little bit about what Jonas Salk's ideas were and to set the stage a little bit about what his view of these topics are. So Heather, would you like to continue? So.